A hearty welcome to this video. This video takes you to the seminar we had at Assumption University in Bangkok on the 23rd and 24th of October 2013. Here we had the Aufabc offices, that's the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences, organized by the Catholic Bishops' Conferences of this area, the whole of Asia. We have a federation of all these conferences together. The presidents or delegates of these conferences, together with some specialists interested in helping in the problem of climate change, assembled over here. We heard experts speaking to us for about, it was a two-day meeting. They spoke to us, gave us a lot of input, but we also reflected among ourselves on the difficulties our people are facing, how we can respond, how Asia can respond, how the church can respond, and how we can help people to respond. It's been a very fruitful seminar. I think we learned a lot, we reflected a lot, we shared a lot. We've come out with enthusiasm and awareness of the problem and enthusiasm to go and do something, and I hope that we will be able to make a difference. All of us are looking forward to a banquet of ideas which will give us a lot of input, understanding, and I sure motivation to work for climate, to work against climate change, to work for the progress of humanity. I was going through the United Nations Development Project reports, and I saw in one of the earlier reports a phrase that struck me. It said that climate change is an unparalleled threat to human development. I think in these 2 days, as we listen, discuss, share our experiences, and reflect, we will understand a little bit more about this whole concept of climate change, the causes, the consequences, and the measures that we can take, possibly to try to limit the damage it makes and the dangers it creates for the future. We know, or we have seen in recent past in our own countries. I come from India, and we've had about a week back a severe cyclonic storm. The same storm, the same intensity about 14 years ago, came up for 14 years, took away 10,000 lives. Fortunately, this time the government was alert, had learned its lessons, and the damage to life was less, 23 I think in last count. But Caritas India, which went over there to the spot, told me the damage to property, etc. is colossal. Hasn't got the imagination of the media, because the loss of life was less. But there is tremendous amount of damage being caused. We've had, again, in the Philippines, storms, typhoons. We have in our whole area of Asia, continuous onslaughts of inclement weather causing massive damage, loss of life, loss of human facilities, and consequently really slowly diminishing our possibility, the possibility of humanity to live a good life. We know that the agricultural sector, rural development, is what is most going to be affected and is affected by the effect of climate change.
I will speak about the fundamental basis of the problem, the physical basis of the problem. Usually when I speak about climate change, I don't do that alone. I don't do that only, I mean. But I do this morning in the full knowledge that other speakers will also speak about other aspects of the issue like impacts of climate change, and most importantly, about some of the solutions, on elements of solutions which can be brought forward. Because otherwise, just listening to me, you might be a little bit depressed, which I wouldn't like to do. So before beginning to talk about the physical aspects of the climate change issue, I'd like to say a few words about what the the physical basis, of course, but also the consequences, the impacts, the vulnerability of people and ecosystems to climate change, and also the solution that can be brought forward, both in the area of adaptation or adjustment, if you like, or prevention, which is called mitigation, and which covers essentially the reduction of greenhouse gases. So the IPCC has 3 working groups to deal with those different aspects, and the first working group deals with the physical basis, and that is the working group which completed its contribution to the 5th report, but also a number of special reports on specific issues. The key characteristic of the IPCC, I mean, there are several key characteristics of the IPCC. It's an organization associating hundreds of scientists throughout the world. It's the part of the Earth where most of the temperature records, where the temperature record is the longest, because there are more continents in that part of the planet. Now, if one looks at the distribution in space of this temperature over the last 100 years, you see that of frozen seawater. You see that since the beginning of the satellite measurements in 1979, this area never stopped decreasing, at least viewed as a trend. Because again, this is another example of the way sometimes you have misleading information that is presented. You could also hear about this. You may have heard that in September this year, and September is usually the month of the year where the minimum extent of sea ice is observed. In September this year, there was a significantly larger sea ice extent in the Arctic than last year. Last year was an absolute minimum for the past 30 years. All the records were broken. But this year, the sea ice extent is almost 50%, was almost 50% larger at the time of the minimum. And if you present only this information, very large changes potentially. Now, with models, you can also look, of course, not only at the 5 degrees over the continental part of the region. You can also look at precipitation, changes in precipitation, because of course it's not only the temperature which changes. Overall, in a warmer climate, you have more evaporation over the oceans. So it's very simple. A warmer climate is overall, at the world scale, on the average, a wetter climate, because there's more water vapor in the atmosphere, more possibilities to rain. Now, it doesn't mean every region of the Earth is wetter. Actually, what model shows is that the regions which are wet today, in general, become wetter. The region, I hope you will see that there are options to indeed protect climates for future generations, and also options to adjust to the part of climate change that we have not been able to prevent. Thank you very much for your attention.
The conference, there was a lot of criticism about the scientific findings. Now again, before the Warsaw meeting in November, once again there are a lot of criticism. And criticism criticisms are coming from say the Fox News and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. And so I get the impression that are certain business houses or certain ideologies backing the criticism, and also the IPC findings. Some say is it also backed by certain sort of groups, and that is why the findings have come. So is there some politics also behind this climate debate?
Thank you very much for your question. Well, I think it's very clear that some of the questions around the climate issues are very political. You know, an answer I often give to this question is that, I think that the title of the movie that Al Gore produced in 2006 was actually very well chosen, An Inconvenient Truth. What scientists do is not, I mean, they don't hold the truth, obviously, but they are seeking the truth. They're looking after it, and they try to do their job as honestly as possible, and so does the IPCC. But the result is seen as inconvenient for those who would like us to continue using fossil fuels as we have over the last century. And those who don't want to see any change in the way the economy is working are trying to undermine the scientific basis for the analysis of the problem. But if they criticize the messenger, it's not going to to change the laws of physics. I mean, the greenhouse effect has been known for almost 200 years now. 95 or 97% of competent scientists agree about the scientific basis. So there's no politics in the physics itself, but there's a lot of politics around the problem, because the logical conclusions that one needs to draw from the scientific analysis are that indeed we need to move away as quickly as possible from using fossil fuels to fuel the world economy, and that's inconvenient.
Oh, wonderful, yeah, it would be important that they did, but China should really...
be undermined. The large-scale predicted biodiversity loss in this region could lead to significant reduction in ecosystem services upon which many people, as you know, rely. Turning now to results from the regions themselves. First, to go through Africa. Africa has long been recognised as asked to focus on specific issues within Southeast Asia and South Asia. So that's why I've taken some time to go through the African context for you, because I think the lessons are quite generic. Now, turning quickly now to Southeast Asia, obviously a very dynamic region where there is very strong economic growth and urbanisation trends, but one in which poverty and inequality remain significant, if not entrenched, regionally. It has a high and projected increasing exposure to slow onset impacts of climate change, including sea level rise, ocean warming and acidification. And when these are combined with what are sometimes termed sudden onset impacts like tropical cyclones, rapidly increasing heat waves, this can compound the potential problems. We also see adverse effects on several sectors simultaneously occurring, which may feed into undermined coastal livelihoods in the region. We did not look at inland Southeast Asia. It wasn't within the mandate of this report, although I'm aware of many projections and scientific studies for inland Southeast Asia as well, and can comment on those in questions. The deltaic areas are particularly vulnerable to sea level rise, combined with the projected increase in tropical cyclone intensity. So overall, we looked at coastal zones and the productivity in these zones at risk from the heat waves projected, the sea level rise, tropical cyclones, and so on. What we saw is that the deltaic regions and the economic activities that are currently conducted on them could be severely impacted by the combined effects of sea level rise and tropical cyclone intensity. One example could be the Bangkok floods, which interrupted, the recent ones, which interrupted global supply chains for technology companies globally, and which have begun to lead to shifting of production activities away from Bangkok towards more secure regions. That's one of the consequences that we looked at in the report of the rising effect of these kinds of problems happening. Fisheries are very important to high warming levels, but the other side of it is that it's possible to avoid this world, and that was one of the big things the bank asked us to look at. What is the literature saying about the avoidance of this world? And it's quite clear that there are many options to avoid this world. In fact, the IPCC Working Group 1 helped a bit with this in the last few weeks by showing that its lowest scenario, RCP 2.6, which is a physics scenario, I guess, but underlying that are technically and economically feasible model studies which show this level of warming could be achieved in practice, would actually hold warming below 2 degrees in the 21st century.
So I'm just thinking, here comes the stupid question. Is it not good when we have climate change in Mongolia? That's a question that I'm asking. Is it, or how do we disperse the cold of Mongolia to come here maybe in Thailand so that we have better weather here? Come? I don't like because it's too hot.
Back veranda in April, and I asked myself the same question actually. God, I wish it would get a bit warmer. The kind of extremes that you were just talking about happening in Mongolia, where you're getting a substantial increase in summer temperatures that are having a substantial negative effect on, and at least seasonally, on grass availability and crop production and livestock, are associated also with some more extreme winters, actually. And the more extreme winters may be linked to the reduction of the Arctic sea ice. Still a hypothesis in the scientific community, but there are a number of papers which propose mechanisms that seem to me to be quite plausible, that as a consequence of the loss of Arctic sea ice, that the jet stream system around the world will get more curvy, I guess if I can put it this way, and lock in and bring to some regions more extreme winters. And to do so relatively systematically, whilst at that same latitude, if you averaged around that latitude of the planet, it's warming. So in some regions, we could therefore see an increase in seasonality, actually. And so the warming overall may not bring the benefits that sometimes you...
According to me, my understanding, by all calculations, it seems the reason of climate change now are two. One is industrialization and another is population growth. Because of the population growth, there is a pressure on the natural resources, and because of that also there is the more consumption and deforestation. And industrialization is giving more carbon emission. So what do you think about these things?
Sure. Well, population and changing consumption patterns that actually causes the most damage ultimately. And it's the kind of consumption, and particularly the use of natural resources and energy, and particularly the inefficient use of natural resources and energy, that is contributing the most to greenhouse gas.
I'm from Germany, and unfortunately sometimes I'm under the impression that the results of certain football games are moving the people more than climate change. So therefore I would like to learn from you, do all these findings really reach the heart and the mind of the political and economic decision makers? Or is something needed from civil society in order to help them moving into the right direction?
In Germany as well for the government. So I guess my perspective on that is that in the last few years in Germany, it's very clear that climate change was not just off the agenda, that the coalition government, particularly the party that's just lost its seats in the parliament, was very much against climate action. And that the German government was pretty much gridlocked as a consequence of that. I'm hopeful now that we'll move into a situation where the German government will begin to move forward with its policies to both achieve the energy transformation due to the nuclear phase-out and to base that on renewables and energy efficiency and not on coal.
Is solar energy, using the panels, etc., really that clean? And secondly, what about the use of the so-called paperless society that we keep calling for? Is using laptops and Wi-Fis and all the satellites having any other kind of impact which is worse than cutting renewable trees?
Actually, but if you look at the science of, let's say, footprinting technologies, in other words, working out what their total environmental cost is from beginning to end, then no technology has a small environmental footprint. All technologies have a cost. And photovoltaics and wind turbines and so on are not alone in that. But on a life cycle cost basis, photovoltaic systems are very efficient. And you can have confidence that with modern manufacturing and so on, that the benefits of them far outweigh.
And I'm in charge of education for FABC. I'd like to encourage our school children to contribute to the betterment of the world. What hope could I give them if we have projects in Asia trying to mitigate the increase, but in some large industrial country there is unmitigated increase in warmth? Will our puny efforts not destroy, or will make a mark when some other part of the world is not doing anything? So I'd like to give them the climate change situation, but more than that, I'd like to give them the hope that any little thing contributes to that. How can we counteract the unmitigated increase in the warmth? Thank you.
That no country or small group of countries can really solve it. And that's a profound physical fact, and it's a profound ethical and moral fact as well, that requires special attention by everyone. I think that the activities taken by people in the Philippines to reduce emissions become a moral force on those in other countries that have not so taken action. So I think that you cannot underestimate the power of example and the power of will when carried to others to say, okay, now we have done our bit, and unless you do yours, we are all going to be in a very big mess.
Professor Van Eppersel, Dr. Bill Hare, you are two scientists who have just addressed a meeting of Catholic bishops of Asia on climate change. What do you think the audience reaction was? Do you think that they were following you? And what kind of a role do you see for the church and churches in general in mobilizing public opinion?
Well, I saw a very dedicated audience listening very carefully, and I understood they were quite aware of their responsibilities. I mean, the church has a lot of influence power in the world, and if the church was mobilized to help fighting climate change, it would be a good thing.
Yeah, the bishops and the eminences here were paying a great deal of attention to the problems that we're describing. Climate change presents a big threat to development and to poverty alleviation in South Asia and Southeast Asia, one that will grow rapidly with time and would begin to affect the Church's core mission in many areas in Southeast Asia and South Asia, where many church programs are concerned about helping people cope with or alleviate or get themselves out of poverty and social distress. And climate change looks set to amplify those considerations. So I think that's one of the reasons why the bishops...
Dr. Hare, you are also known to be or have been a climate activist, very close to NGOs, non-governmental organizations. Are they doing enough to mobilize public opinion and influence politicians, or can they do more, for instance, in Warsaw next month?
Yes, I think the new IPCC report is coming at a very important time for remobilizing public opinion and governments on the climate change issue. I think climate change has well and truly dropped down the political agenda because of the global financial crisis. We're coming through that now. And the IPCC reports, the World Bank Turn Down the Heat reports, are now creating an opportunity for civil society, the scientific community and governments to really raise up their level of ambition and action on the problem. So yes, I think that one of the first tests of this is going to be in Warsaw, where on the Warsaw agenda is a very fundamental discussion about whether or not governments are going to bring forward higher levels of mitigation ambition and higher levels of proposed emission reductions for post-2020.
Just one explanation and then a question, please. One of the bishops asked about the population and the effects on... one very interesting point is at one conference, there was just presumed that it was population pressure that was doing in the tropical rainforest. But the Union of Concerned Scientists put out a report indicating that the real pressure was on the deforestation of the tropical rainforests in Latin America came from not population pressure at all, but from population seeking luxury items, so that having a fine leather coat brought the cattle into the, yes, more consumption, but not necessarily population. So in other words, that whole context is open to the subtlety of research and indications rather than a presumption.
What we see here is the lower Mekong Basin. This covers parts of Laos, Thailand baseline for temperature as an average daily temperature. And you can see the yellow, the lighter the yellow area is, the less hot it is, and the darker the red area, the more hot it is. So you've got some very dark areas here and some yellow areas here. This is what it's going to look like in 2050. And probably more importantly, this is what the shifts will be. So you're looking at blue areas being less hot to very red areas where you're looking at significant change in the baseline temperature. And what's interesting here is to look not only at areas that are yellow now that are going to turn red, but also areas that are red now that are going to get redder. And that has an impact on how crops grow as well. Rice, which is, we're in the rice basket of the world. for both rain-fed and irrigated rice. You'll see temperatures above 35 degrees Celsius, which really impact the growing stage in the dry season. Other crops are impacted more by precipitation. Livestock, the temperatures again, community systems, so these are the pigs and the chickens and the ducks that communities rely on. We'll see increasing disease risk. For small and medium commercial systems, there'll be temperature risk will emphasize costs, so feed will become more expensive. And in general, climate change in concert with other development impacts will increase disease risk for all livestock systems. This is an important point because climate change is not happening in a vacuum.
My question is, you spoke about aquaculture, crops, and livestock, but you did not speak about wildlife or birds. Does not this have a very important aspect? Like Taiwan, for instance, has been studying this, and in Russia also, especially of wildlife, that its importance in climate change science. Would that not give us more hope, or is it excluded?
It is part of the I can't touch on all the results that came out of the study, but I will say that what we were really focused on, and I come from a biodiversity background, so biodiversity is very important to me, and particularly in our IUCN site in Laos, it is a high biodiversity area, and we were interested in piloting these climate activities in an area of high biodiversity so that we can have an impact on improving a lot of biodiversity. However, the focus of climate adaptation in our project in particular is really on communities. So the approach is to look at ecosystems. How do ecosystems benefit communities? And how do things like strengthening resilience of ecosystems? If you plant more trees, if you rehabilitate mangroves, there will be very important impacts for communities in strengthening resilience and also for biodiversity. So we come at this from a very, very strong ecosystem perspective, and we feel as if you can strengthen the resilience of the ecosystem, and this is really what our field sites are. In fact, they're called ecosystem and community-based adaptation initiatives. I didn't mention that. But if you can strengthen the resilience of the ecosystem, you can get at natural resources being improved, biodiversity adaptation being strengthened, and community resilience being strengthened.
We had a remarkable diocesan father from Chiang Mai who worked with the indigenous people, Father Maspet, Father Nipot, yeah. Well, Father Nipot, to chime in some sense with the care for traditional, he was working as a very young priest with indigenous people in the Chiang Mai area. And he convinced the people no longer to grow exotic vegetables for the hotels in Bangkok, but rather to go back to their paddy rice yields 2 times a year. And the reason was because he felt that their own songs, their own history, indicated this. Well, they did so. And with their going back to their traditional modes, 34 species of birds and the Thai tiger came back. So there's a sense in which there's a rather sense of integration here.
If you look at the countries that we're working in, Vietnam is a communist country, Laos is a communist country, Cambodia is essentially an authoritarian country, and government policy is really strong in these places. And while I talked about things like comfort zones and where crops can grow, that's not always how things are grown. Things like markets and policy really matter. So you see that in where things are grown now. Given temperature, rainfall currently, not everything matches up with where things should be optimally grown, and we're seeing that in the future it'll get perhaps more skewed. So what I guess the good news in that is that as these changes start to take effect as a result of climate change, the governments also recognize that this is important for their national economies. And they need to start thinking about different approaches that they'll be taking. As I said, there really are no climate skeptics. They may not accept everything that's in our report, lock, stock, and barrel, because they want to, just like my government does, want to do things the way they've been doing it. But they do recognize that these changes are occurring, so they're looking for opportunities to adapt better in a way that is not going to impact the national economy in a very detrimental way. So I think as you're looking at how things are grown, they're either going to have to increase the inputs to a point where things aren't sustainable, or they have to start shifting to things that are perhaps more sustainable going forward. So that's, you can only beat Mother Nature so far until things start to break down. And that's what we're trying to look at, is where the thresholds are for these things. And you can push it past there a little bit, but eventually they're going to have to come back to, okay, we're not getting the yields, we're not getting the markets that we want, so what else can we do, or how can we do it in a way that's more sustainable, I think. And that's what we're trying to give, is some examples from the bottom up of ways that are going to be providing good economic livelihoods for communities and sort of be better in tune with the projections for climate change in the future.
Anybody wants to chair the meeting and to report? Do we take two people, one to report and one to chair, or?
Contaminated, and then extremes of climates are experienced. Because of flash floods and heavy rains, earth slips are very common, Sri Lanka, India, and monsoons fail, it come out of the time, so people believe in monsoon and crops fail, and afterwards suddenly it rains and it floods. So either you, by dry season you get havoc, or by rains you get havoc. This is the one. Therefore, typical example was given. Cherrapunji is a place where it was known to be the highest for rainfall. Today there is no rainfall there. These are all examples. So the proposals were that the church should have a policy statement. The Bishops' Conference of each country should make a policy statement on climate change. It is like people, we are like a small David facing a big Goliath, but it has to be done. Something like, for example, we should make it a kind of policy, like make it a green church, lifestyle and things like that. We should advise the middle class particularly, who are very much consumers, to reduce consumers and take the responsibility for climate change, for a simpler life, eco-friendly life. And we should have a lot of lobbying, advocacy.
Sister Diana, Wendy, you are amongst the rather few women we are seeing at this conference of the Asian bishops. And you're both staff members of the FABC. Do you think that there has been enough focus on gender issues relating to climate change and the particular problems which women will face if climate change really begins to hit in Asia? Sister.
Quite a lot. I'm sure women are, in fact, would be the most hit, together with children. That's my personal opinion, because they're the ones who carry on family life, home life. And this morning I was so happy with what Father Brinkman took up, because I felt that point of mysticism should be part of the whole discussion about climate change, and he took it up.
I feel that it's women who are working in the rural sector most of the time, and the issues of flooding, of bad weather created by climate change is going to hit them very specially. And they are also doing 80% of the work in Asia, women, and most of the work is rural work or outdoor work. So the ability of women to fend for their families is drastically reduced. And with the separation of families because of climate change issues and poverty issues, you have women going overseas more and more to bring some income for their families. So it's a major issue for women. And perhaps it's our job now to start translating what we've heard at this seminar to our own offices that deal with women's issues or laity and family issues. Yes.
The FABC office have contact with lay women's organizations, national federations, those kinds of organizations. And you, sister, as a consecrated religious, do you have dialogues with nuns from non-Christian religions such as Buddhism?
Yes, in fact, last July, I had a chance to join an international group. Well, it's mainly because of my congregation. We spent time with the Buddhist nuns who were ordained, and 2 or 3 other centers where the Buddhists are also working very much for the environment, ecology, simple lifestyle, and I felt that we had a lot to learn from them.
With my office, our main network is with the family commissions and the women's desks or women's commissions in the different conferences of Asia. And through these conferences, we try to network with local NGOs or church-based organizations that are working for women. So that's our main connections.
My dear friends,
so do you think that your church can contribute to informing the public at large about climate change in a more kind of extensive way than has been possible in the past?
I feel that women religious, because that's my area, are more in touch with communities, schools, even the different women groups. They speak about these issues very often because they know it is something that cannot be, that we cannot be blind to anymore. It is so obvious. And in the Philippines, I'm very much aware of what they have done in this regard. They do a lot of conscientization in this area.
I think that we can do a lot if we start putting the ecological questions and learnings into every one of our conferences and discussions. And we certainly can move this topic along in all our offices of the FABC, not only the family and women and small communities. My office is also in charge of the small Christian communities with another secretary. And that is the grassroots that we can reach in the church to inform on these issues, I think.
I've heard a lot of the messages just reported from your groups from other parts of the world too. I personally worked these, and the overall message about the need for people to understand and to be empowered to cope with the challenges that they're facing is an almost universal story that I'm hearing in my work around the world, and I think it's a story that you're obviously listening to, and that the church can play a role in educating, legitimizing people's concerns and empowering them to get the information, knowledge to, at their own level, in their own communities, begin to deal with the issues that they're confronting, which may be increasing prevalence of disasters of different kinds. And the other side of the equation, which I complicate the capacities of local communities and regions to adapt, and I think that's also a role that this group might play, is in strengthening the governance aspects that relate to managing the development of climate change, adaptation and resilience.
This is, while you're all here as the church isn't a monolith, and similar to how we're trying to have a local context, I think it's different in every country. So understanding in the country where you have the most impact, what's your comparative advantage? In places perhaps like the Philippines, the church is a very powerful actor. In other countries, the church in specific sectors or regions of the country, the church is a very powerful actor and can identify champions to move things forward. In other places, it's perhaps viewed as more neutral. It's not, its main goal, people understand, is to help, and that can be a useful tool. So, I think breaking things down by country is important, understanding what you can do in your countries.
It validates many of us. I have been in the climate change negotiations from the 1990s on, from the very beginning. And in the last 10, 15 years, those of us from developing countries have shifted a lot of our attention from mitigation to adaptation, to getting adaptation recognized as a need at the global level and actually done at the national and the local level. And I think it's very, very important for us to really move forward on and get things happening on the ground, while also remembering that we can never really fully adapt, and therefore we still have our eyes also on mitigation at the global level, because things will get worse.
That the problem is indeed severe, as explained this morning, but that there are many solutions at hand, both in terms of technologies to use as practices, behavior to either to maintain or to change. And so what's unwritten is that what is lacking is the political will to implement those elements of solutions and to make the right choices. And again, as what Tony was just saying a second ago, of course the church is not a policy maker, but I'm convinced that you have a big advantage over policymakers, because policymakers have a short-term view. Usually, like many other decision makers in the economic world as well, their time scale is the next elections or the next financial deadline, while a 2,000-year institution with a 2,000-year-old institution with a much longer-term view can go away from that constraint and also can, through its influence both on those who elect the policy makers and the policy makers themselves, can bring some of that long-term view which is so needed to talk about climate change.
It's been a very, very enlightening day. Is there an inevitability about the whole thing?
I'm absolutely convinced that not everything is inevitable. Now, of course, there's a lot of inertia, so we're not going to stop the warming tomorrow morning or even in the 10 coming years. But I am convinced that, and the Working Group 3 report of the IPCC will show that again when it comes out in April, that the choices that can be made in the coming 10, 20, 30 years can have and will have a key impact and make a big difference on the climate we leave to the next generation in 40, 50, 60 years and later. So, no, the climate evolution is not inevitable. There was an ecumenical conference on this subject where all the religions would put aside their differences, doing what would be needed to a certain extent in the UN around this problem, and what receives many criticism from outside of people who don't understand why each country is defending its own little interest instead of promoting the collective interests of all the inhabitants of the planet, both humans and non-humans, because I really think that the ecosystems are absolutely key to human life, actually, and they're really part of the whole thing. But to come back to my suggestion, wouldn't the role of religions in general and the church in particular much stronger if you were teaming up with all the other religions who would accept to think that way, putting aside some of the differences? I think you might be much stronger if you are doing that trying to act alone, each church one at a time, around this problem. And the problem is, as you said, so important from an ethical point of view, from a moral point of view, that probably a lot of common ground could be found with other religions, at least some of them, around this issue, and that would be a step forward. And if the Vatican and all its branches and all its local parishes, etc., had a climate plan, I'm sure it would have an influence by example on the communities around, and also politically, if the Vatican was a party to the convention and the protocol and participating actively to the preparation of the next climate agreement that is due to be adopted in 2015 in Paris, that could make a difference.
Monsignor Figueredo and Mr. Hartman, you have been active in this afternoon's proceedings about adaptation to climate change. So starting with you, Mr. Hartman, your very interesting project has brought the science to the farmers. Are the farmers bringing wisdom to the scientists?
Well, I think that's the goal of the project, is not only to bring the top-down understanding of the scientific community to the farmers, but also to recognize that they're in a very unique position of understanding what's happened on the ground, of seeing the trends, and essentially being able to ground truth what the scientists are predicting. And in doing so, we hope that the experience of the farmers will help to inform the science at the highest levels. As was discussed on numerous occasions today, the science has uncertainty built in. And one of the best ways to ensure that things are happening as are projected is to have people on the ground to verify that. And in doing that, I think it really does help to have the farmers involved and to have their information and understanding fed up into the larger discussion about climate change and fed into the projections that the scientists are coming up with.
Yes, our community is small, but our activity is, I would say, it's big. We are not there just for the Catholic people. We are in Cambodia for all. If I am a perfect apostolic, I am a perfect apostolic for all the people, and especially for the needy, for the people and we can see that all these problems of climate change and environment, the poor people in the countryside are the most affected. So we want to know how to help them, and when we come here to reflect and to think and to see, we see means how we can support them, how we can help them. But also we have our little initiatives through Caritas, through our communities, to make awareness and also to be actively in the environment in a positive way, not just to suffer the problems of the climate change. We want the life of the people to be better. So we do a lot of action in recycling, in cleaning the water, in planting trees, in teaching the children. So we are our teaching or our help, our support to the people that we are working with is also to have good knowledge of how to care for their environment, for the future. Yes.
Mr. Hartman, there have been some very scary projections, they're probably just speculation, about the impact of sea level rise on the Mekong Delta. I assume you're looking at this. So what is the best case and the worst case scenario?
Well, I think many of the global projections do highlight that sea level rise will impact the Mekong Delta. So I think that in a sense, those projections, whether you're looking at significantly longer floods or significantly deeper floods, will probably come to fruition in some way, shape, or form. So the best case scenario then is to react to that and to find ways to adapt to that inevitability for the lower Mekong and for the Mekong Delta. So the government and the communities are starting to identify ways that they can adapt to the projected impacts of sea level rise and increased salinity in the Delta. And I think based on the discussions that I've had in that area, the government takes it very seriously. And I think if the government takes it seriously and they recognize this as a threat, that they can take significant steps to deal with this. The communities recognize that their livelihoods are at stake, so they're also very willing to take steps. So while the science is telling us that something serious will happen in terms of sea level rise, it's now up to the government and to the communities to begin planning for that inevitability. And the best case scenario is that they can take significant steps to do so.
Monsignor Enrique, Professor Van Ippersel called upon the Catholic Church to mobilize people from other Christian churches and other faiths to act far more strongly on climate change. So how would this work in Cambodia, which is a mainly Buddhist country?
I think in Cambodia we are very lucky with the Buddhists. We are together in many social issues, and the ecological issues is one of them. In June we had a very nice workshop with the Buddhist monks, with the Islam leaders, and us from the Catholic Church, but also we had some representatives from other Christian denominations, and we were discussing about what we can bring to the issue of climate change. Everyone was bringing their ideas, their vision, and also their activities. So we were learning from each other, and also at the end we had some tree planting together. So in Cambodia we are lucky because the Buddhists, the Buddhist church, the Buddhist leaders, they are very open for cooperation, and they are the majority, and they include us, and we are learning how to cooperate with them. And now in the university, the Buddhist University of Battambang, we are invited there to teach about Christianism, but also we have this interaction that make us to deal with the issues. Like for example, the last talk that I had there, I was how we address the social issues from our faith to the Buddhist monks. No, so we are in cooperation, and I think it's the only way to resolve matters together. And I think climate change is an opportunity, a chance to put us together, and we don't have to miss this point, to miss this occasion. Yes.
The gentleman yesterday mentioned several changes that will be coming, whether we like it or not. They're talking about inertia. Basically, what that means is greenhouse gas already in the atmosphere will basically change the weather. You cannot just put a stop to it. So there's already inertia in the system. So what they are saying is that there will be an increase in temperature. The range is still an issue that could be worked out. Between 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 degrees, 1.5 or 2 to 6 degrees, and so on. So those are the ranges that we've been given. Also, they have talked about extreme events. There will be more extreme events coming our way if we do not take action. Also, tropical cyclones. They mentioned that even though the frequency will not increase, but the intensity will, because of the warming in the atmosphere. And also, they talked about sea level rise. So these are some of the changes that are coming our way. So we will try and link it to what is actually, with those changes, what are some of the impacts.
Father John and Mr. Nakalevu, we've heard very interesting presentations from you today about the enormous problems facing small Pacific islands. There's this big negotiation going on, so what do you hope will come out for your countries at the end of 2015 from the UNFCCC process?
Thank you. For us in the Pacific small island developing states, one of the three main issues that we would like to look at, and one of that is actually the legally binding agreement. We would like the next agreement to come up in 2015 is basically to be legally binding. That is quite important for us, so that we have to be rest assured that there will always be something that the countries can actually be taken to tasks with, especially in the area of emission reduction. We know that there are views that there are national commitments that are being undertaken at present that is outside of the current negotiations, but we believe that there is a need for legally binding agreement to be assured that there will be action that is undertaken in the area of global emission reductions. And the second point is on loss and damage. I think this is a key issue for the region. We have permanent losses, particularly in relation to land. We have storm surges, inundation, coastal erosion. These are things that will be lost for us, and we have a very good view of that from the video on cataract. These are challenges that are facing not only the Pacific, but a lot of small island developing states, and there is a need for us to be financed, particularly from insurances to insure losses, particularly from slow onset events like sea level rise. The other main point is financing, and I think this is something that we will always continue to call for, the financing of our adaptation. We need some continuous financing. A lot of the pledges that have been made on the issue of fast climate financing, this is not coming online. So we hope that this is something that will continue to be real and predictable, so that we can plan for that. Thank you.
To see like in the next meeting that we have a binding agreement that will cater for small island states who are affected by climate change. And I would want to see that others feel what we feel, and see that something is done to help people who are affected by rising sea level and the impacts climate change is having on small island states and other coastline communities who are suffering from storm surges and other impacts that we have from climate change. And if we can have an agreement that is legally binding, and if we can have industrialized countries or developed countries to understand our situation and help in the finances to solve and to at least minimize the problems that small island states are facing. Thank you.
Dr. Lavinia, you are a UNFCCC veteran. Maybe you've been to more conferences than anybody. So what is your hardened, cynical view as an experienced diplomat of what may come out in 2015, and will this be enough to close the emissions gap by 2020 and deliver the kind of measures that the planet needs to avoid runaway climate change?
I will not call myself a cynical negotiator, and I'm certainly not the one with the most, but I'm a realistic, hard-nosed negotiator. I think a legally binding agreement is doable. The only question is whether it's going to be ambitious or not. And so I think we have to push to make it as ambitious as possible. We must push that it's not the least common denominator, which happens a lot here, because I think it's a failure if you have an agreement, but it's a bad or a weak agreement. And that's possible. But I think the more likely scenario is something in between. You know, I mean, we have a good agreement, but it needs to be fleshed out. And that's fine. If we need another couple of years to flesh that out, that's good, as long as the targets for emission reductions and for financing adaptation and financing mitigation in developing countries is actually quite clear. As long as those targets are clear, I think it's all right to have the rules for that develop as the years unfold. So I'm actually hopeful for this process. I mean, well, because you know, the report of the IPCC has just come out, and it's staring us into our face, the disaster that all of us will face. And there's no exception. No country will be spared.
Well, we've now come to the end of this conference, which was for Catholic religious, and heard quite a lot about what they hope to do to contribute to mobilizing public awareness and public opinion.
I think there is a role for the Church in the whole climate negotiations, particularly when we have heard from the meeting that it's all about justice, it's about equity, it's about looking after the poor, the vulnerable people, that actually will be the most affected by the changes in the climate that is already happening right now. And I think there is also a need to look beyond and look at how the Church can also affect the negotiations. There is a need for the voices of the Church representing the vulnerable people in the negotiations. That is something that is needed to make the conscious and aware, the awareness of the negotiators, that we are not just dealing with the numbers, greenhouse gas emissions, technologies, and so on, but we are dealing with people, the vulnerable people, the challenged people. These are where the Church's role is to be able to be the voice of these people in these negotiations and beyond. And also, just on the issue of adaptation, the Church has a role in adaptation as well. The network of the Church is very much in all our countries, particularly for small island developing states. The network is there, and donors, partners, organizations like the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Program will need to work closely with the Church to be able to get some of the adaptation financing to channel through the Church to be able to reach the vulnerable people on the ground that are actually facing the challenges of climate change.
Most definitely the Church has a very important role in both this process of negotiations as well as in climate change in general. I mean, I think it has a teaching role to remind us of the importance of ethics, importance of social justice, the importance of stewardship of creation as we design solutions for the climate change challenge. It's also very important, the prophetic role of the Church, to condemn, you know, the practices. We know we don't condemn the sinner, but we condemn the sins. The practices that have led to where we are, namely the environmental and the economic practices that have led to where we are by countries, by societies, by communities, even by individuals. And I would like the Church to be very strong about that. And as I've said, the church has a pastoral missionary role here to be with its people that's going to suffer, especially the poor. And this is where, as pointed out, adaptation actually comes in. And honestly, the best thing that the church can still do, which it should do with all the other things, is to pray for us that are engaged in this process, for the world, for success of this process. I mean, I think we should all be storming the heavens for the success of Paris.
Do you also see a role for the other non-Christian faiths? How could they fit into this particular drive?
Yes, I think all the great religions of the world have an ethic and spirituality of creation that's pretty similar from what I've seen. And so I think there's a lot of groups that are faith-based and different, both Christian denominations as well as non-Christian denominations. They're actually active in this, and there's nothing that really divides us in this. So yes, definitely.
This is the space available, 271. And the way we are using this space, or we have used in historically, most of the rich people have been emitting carbon in the atmosphere. Now, and poor have not been emitting, or very minimal. Now, in order to lift them out of the poverty trap, they need to use more energy. They need to have clean access fuel. They need to have electricity, for which so far the only hope is again coal or fossil fuel, while we are trying to move to the renewable energy. But even if it is renewable energy, the problem is that investment in renewable energy will lead towards extraction of resources, at least initial investment. In order to make a wind turbine, you need iron, you need minerals, right? In order to have solar panels, you need minerals. Even if they are one-time investments, but there is going to be an investment. So you will need that kind of emissions which will at least ensure that millions are lifted out of the poverty trap. So how to use this available resource is the choice that we need to make now. So poverty eradication or luxury lifestyle, I'll not say luxury, actually I should have put wasteful lifestyle. Accelerate social and ecological objectives in 25 years. That's the challenge. I was talking to one of a colleague just now in tea break also. In sustainable development, there are 3 pillars: social, ecological, and economical. Economical pillar has become so strong, and everybody wants to show the progress in terms of economical, basically GDP, and this indicates we are talking in terms of what rich wants. Poor doesn't want to talk about economical because it's a very distant objective for them. As of now, they need social upliftment. Social pillar need to be strengthened. And if we can accelerate social and ecological objectives and bring it at par to the economical pillar, I think we are talking about equitable world, even in climate constrained world. Puzzle, and we are advocating an equity reference framework. Equity reference framework will ensure that that countries can assess each other's commitment against each other, because there's been a talk about comparable efforts. So if they can compare efforts, and that can motivate them to put more numbers on the table. That's why we thought equity reference framework will be good. It's an excellent monitoring framework once it is properly developed. This is work in progress, but good amount of progress has been made.
In the very last statements by Father John Bosco from Papua New Guinea, he said something that really struck me. He said that only nature will save us. And there is a sense in which it's been rather easy for humanity to be pragmatic towards the natural world. It seems that it is extraordinarily difficult for humanity to become not intimate, but integral with the natural world. You must do politics and economics within ecology. The paradigm has changed. And it's a remarkable sense in which I think, and it would be the purpose of my presentation in part, or in the most part, to make you part of the Catholic tradition very much at home with that shifted paradigm. There's a sense in which the natural world is the place in which God is present, not merely present to, but in the natural world. And so the whole issue of equity and of environmental concern and care for the earth brings us back to some of the most fundamental themes of our faith. In the midst of a challenging time for all of humanity, in which the perennial teaching of the Church, renewed in our reflection, will be a remarkable contribution to humanity as a whole, and in a very real sense, a recognition that we all have in the earth a common inheritance, and in the preservation and conservation of that earth, a common destiny.
The first theological concern is about having a proper understanding of the concept of stewardship. In other words, it is about being respectful and responsible for the resources and the gifts that God has given us in His creation. It is about sharing in God's appreciation for the world, which He called very good, and recognizing from everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required, and from the one to whom has much been trusted, even more will be demanded. So the belief that God is the creator of the whole universe is found not just in the Bible, we have also found it in the other sacred books of other religious traditions in Asia. So in short, the entire world is God's creation, and its continuing life and preservation are thoroughly dependent upon God. Likewise, man, who is part of God's creation, is also dependent upon Him for his life and survival.
Thank you. God bless once again.
Your Eminence, you yourself said that Catholics in Asia were about 3% of the population. So are you going to be a bit like the yeast we read about in the New Testament, which will make the whole of the rest of the loaf rise, in this case, Asian public opinion?
Thank you. Yes, I would say that. You see, we are about 3%. That's a very small number of people in the whole vast ocean that we have over here in Asia, the rich content we have in Asia. But I do think that we should be like the yeast in the New Testament, making a difference to the thinking of people. I think that many big changes are caused by people thinking, people being bold and creative, and being able to influence others. Evidently, for this we need to make a change. We need to make a change in the mentality of people. We've got to make people aware of the problem. We've got to make people of the possibility of a solution, a response, an adequate response. I think there is a certain urgency in the matter we are aware of now, which we learnt. 1 degree increase in temperature, we were told, is a big rise in the water level in the sea. And if it's 2 degrees more, and they told us beyond 2 degrees you're entering the danger zone. So we know how dangerous it is for our people, not just for the few Catholics that we have. We've got, it's our service, it's our obligation, I would think, to alert people to this, and the whole of civil society must be alert to this. We must, I think, make lobbying and advocacy so that people aware of this are doing something in their own lives. I think we must also speak to policy makers, government leaders, opinion makers, so that really we can address this problem effectively. That's very, very important.
One of the keynote speakers, who is a vice president of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I'm talking about Professor Van Ebersel, advocated some kind of interreligious assembly or mechanism where all the faiths would come together, Christian and non-Christian, to focus on this issue and try and establish some kind of a joint strategy. Now, what do you think of this idea, and what do you think of the Catholic Church leading it?
I think the idea is brilliant. I think it's something that we should have thought about ourselves. We have got many meetings with the heads of other religions. Both we've got certainly the Christian group meeting together, the ecumenical group, and also interreligious groups of other religions. And this certainly is a topic on which we could discuss and exchange notes, learn from them and they learn from us, and together have a joint policy, joint program to influence the minds of people. This is particularly important for us in Asia, because I said we are so few, and we've got so many other religious groups in Asia. We've got other religions. We've got in India Hinduism, we've got the Islam in Bangladesh, Pakistan, Indonesia, we've got Buddhism in a large part of Southeast Asia. So all these religious leaders must come together, come to an agreement on how we can address this problem, and then tell our people so that we can make a difference once again. I think that's a good idea. I'm fully for it.
Your Eminence, you're one of the 8 cardinals selected by His Holiness Pope Francis to look at how to renew the Catholic Church. We read that a lot of focus will be on administrative, organizational matters, that kind of thing. But is there also going to be a focus on environmental issues, climate change issues? So would you be able to bring up these ideas to the next meeting of the cardinals?
We are an advisory body to the Holy Father. We speak to him on what he seeks our advice about. But I know that he himself is very keen on environmental problems. He brought it up in the very first address that he gave after he took over office. And I had an opportunity to talk to him soon after that. I told him how interested I was that he had brought this particular topic. I mentioned to him that we in the FABC were working on this, and then he showed keen interest, and he told me how already in Buenos Aires he was interested in this. So this is going to be one of the key points of his pontificate, and he's stressing on this. I think if he gives a call, and I think he will give a call, it would make a difference to all of us, encourage all of us, and also give us, besides motivation, also a direction, not only to us in Asia, but all over the world.
Back to Asia and the conference in Bangkok. So what do you think you would like to be doing in the first 6 months after this conference?
My hope is that as a result of this conference, we are able to really influence the churches all over Asia. That's because we directly deal with the different Episcopal conferences. So my plan, my hope, is that the Episcopal conferences, the ones in charge, take this topic seriously, discuss it with all their constituents, the churches, the bishops, the people, and arouse a certain consciousness of the urgency of the problem. If we are, I would think of that would be the first step, a step-by-step program. The strategy would be first conscientize people, then see what can be done, and then get people to start doing that, and then influencing governments. I think we can make a difference. Also, I think we must ourselves resolve that we'll be careful in our own projects always to be environment friendly. We were thinking of a green church. That's, I think, what we would like.